And it has utterly changed our life. And it's given us as parents opportunities for our son that he would never have had in Britain. And so I would say fundamentally, teaching overseas is better than teaching in Britain. Yes, it is.
Hello, I'm Tom Rogers, and this is the Rebel Education Podcast. Hello, and welcome to this week's Rebel Education Podcast. This week we're discussing one of the hottest topics in education today, international teaching. Is it all it's cracked up to be? As an international educator myself, my view on this is quite simply, yes, it really is. But in this podcast, we're going to discuss the upsides, the downsides, we're going to have some interviews, we're going to go through the whole shebang, and hopefully by the end, you're going to have an idea yourself of what you think, of what you might be considering going international yourself. If you are, this podcast will hopefully help you to make your mind up. It emerged last year that the number of teachers needed in international schools teaching in English or offering an English medium curriculum is going to go up from somewhere around 402,000 to 800,000 teachers by 2026, and most of those teachers are expected to come from Britain. That is double the number of international teachers that we have currently abroad from the UK. Just last week, there was reports on NQTs leaving straight after their training. Many NQTs now doing that, leaving straight after their training and going international, taking the bursaries that they have been given to train in subjects like maths and so on and going international. Do I personally blame them? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Do I blame the government? Do I blame Ofsted? Do I blame toxic schools? Absolutely yes. That's why, as one of the key drivers for these people going abroad, that's why it was reported in the TES just last week that many of them would consider a return. So this is not about turning their backs on the UK forever. This is about making a rational decision based on well-being. And they've gone abroad, but they would consider a return. However, where are they all going? What are the upsides and the downsides? And why would you take that international leap? So first of all, let's talk about me. My name's Tom. I was a UK-based history teacher for 8 years. 5 years in my first school, 2.5 years in my second school, and obviously training year before that of a year. And in December 2015, I left my job as a head of history to set up my business, my website, and to embark on some training and other things that I did for a 6-month period. And then I saw a job advertised for an international school in Spain. I've never been to Spain before this point. I've never even been on holiday to Spain. I don't know a word of the language. But at this moment, I'd been out of the classroom for, as I say, about 6 months. And I was getting a bit itchy, really, for a return. I'd done a couple of stints of, as I say, teacher training. I'd done a couple of stints on supply teaching. I'd been to a few conferences, like the BET conference and so on. So I'd kept in there, but it just wasn't enough. And I needed to be back in the classroom full time. And I was looking for something different. I didn't want to just go down the same avenue that I'd been in that had led me to wanting to quit the profession, which is essentially what I did. I wasn't actually, when I quit, intending to return, but I thought, I haven't tried international teaching. I haven't tried it, and I should do. And I saw this job, I think it was quite late, it may have been the May or June, in Spain, in Vigo International School. And it was a head of history role, and I got the job. And this was 2.5 years ago now, from the recording of this podcast. I arrived in Spain, not really knowing exactly what to expect. I'd never visited the school, for example. I didn't know even really what the school building looked like. So it was a big gamble. But since then, it's been overall, it's been an absolutely brilliant experience, the absolutely right thing for me to do. International teaching suits me. It suits my personality. It suits everything I'm about, and it's been a revelation really for me that there is a place you can go where you can genuinely have a work-life balance. There are it's become almost a comedy phrase in the United Kingdom, work-life balance, because even the people who say they have it often don't. And this is about a huge change in culture. Now, I'm not saying that every international school that you go to, you're going to get that sea change. I certainly have. In the last 2.5 years, I've rarely taken work home. I've rarely done that extra work that I was doing more or less every single day. I mean, one day of every weekend for me for those 8 years in the UK was taken up with work more often than not. And it was early mornings, it was after school till 5-6 o'clock, planning and so on, especially in the first few years. And that just has not been the case out here for a variety of reasons. I would say the key one is there isn't that accountability, that excessive scrutiny that comes from the government and Ofsted. That, if you take that away, suddenly it's about teaching and it's about what's best for the students and also what's best for teacher well-being. But, if you put those together, you're taking that out and suddenly you're not doing anything that you don't feel you need to do as a professional, hopefully. And I think that to a great extent has been the case for me over the last 2.5 years teaching over here in Spain. There's lots of positives to teaching international. First one is you have an opportunity for career progression. In international schools, you have a high turnover of staff. Most staff would stay for maybe 2 years on average, and then they would leave to somewhere else. Because remember, there are quite a few international teachers on the circuit, in inverted commas, who are doing that for that travel experience. Yes, they're professionals, and they will do that job 100%, but they're also after exploring the world, seeing the world. It's likely these people are going to move on. And leadership positions will come available, and they will come up. Obviously, it might be that the school, like if it was in the UK, they might have internal candidates who they've lined up and they've trained for that position and so on. But perhaps not. It depends on the size of the school as well. Competition for those roles might not be as high as you might think. It depends on obviously the area of the school, the where the job's been advertised, and so on and so forth. So I think that's an upside if you're looking to advance career. I think salary is an upside in most cases, or in some cases. If you go to the Middle East and Asia, you can expect £30,000 to £40,000 tax-free. If you go to Dubai as a standard classroom teacher without any responsibility points, you will get your accommodation, you will get your healthcare, you will probably get a flight home once a year, and you'll get a £40,000 tax-free salary. Although I would add, things are mighty expensive in Dubai, so you would expect to spend more money. But if you didn't save thousands literally thousands over the course of a year, it would be a surprise. However, if you look over in Europe, especially in the Mediterranean, your salaries are going to drop. Your salary is going to be probably significantly lower than it is in the UK, especially if you're an experienced teacher. You might be looking at, say, 25,000 in somewhere like Italy, Spain, Greece, 25,000 euro, around that kind of mark. Obviously, taxes aren't quite as much, and the cost of living is lower, significantly lower than the UK. However, this is not a salary that you're going to save huge amounts of money on. It will probably give you a comfortable lifestyle, but you're not going to become a millionaire. Let's put it that way. But I must add that as an NQT outside of London, you might be looking at £21,000. You could probably make more than that in an international school in Europe, coming straight after your training. Would I advise going on international straight after PGCE? No. Personally, no. I think getting that UK experience is super beneficial. I think you have a 5-year limit to get your NQT certificate. So if you go international, are you then risking not being able to get back in quick enough to get that NQT year done? I also think the younger you are, depending on which country you're going to, I suppose there's a higher risk that you're going to miss home. It might be more difficult leaving. You haven't worked out yet how you are as a teacher, what you are as a teacher, how you prefer to teach. And suddenly you're flung into an environment where you might not have that professional development support that you definitely do in the majority of UK schools, regardless of what we say about the pressure. You know, the standard of professional development on offer in many, many UK schools is very high compared to the rest of Europe and probably the rest of the world. So that is something to consider. But generally speaking, you go to China, you go to Dubai, you go to the Middle East, you're going to make a lot of money. You're going to have professional autonomy. I think that's a big plus side of international schools. You will be left to get on with it a lot more. The international scene, if you like, is very much one where people are expected to move on. So you are left to it to a certain extent. You can experiment in the classroom. You don't have to worry about constant monitoring, constant interfering, constant progress reports, constant etc. I mean, some schools more than others, yes, but generally speaking, internationally, as I've said, you don't have league tables, you don't have the government, you don't have Ofsted. School leaders are not under that kind of pressure there in the UK. It's just not the same. You're going to have more freedom, and you're also going to have that work-life balance. You're probably not going to take work home half as much as you would in the UK. Yes, you're going to have spikes, and we know what the spikes are: report writing, maybe parents' evening pushes marking back, so on and so forth. But you're probably going to get more PPAs than you would in the UK. More often than not, you will. You're probably going to have less meetings. You're probably going to have less things happening that add to workload during the day, work scrutinies, for example, lesson observations, that kind of thing. You're probably going to have less of that. Another positive is you're going to meet a lot of new people. You know, you talk about lifestyle change, and if you go to an international city, particularly one that has a real cultural hub and a real movement of people in and out, you're going to really meet a lot of new people. You're going to experience a lot of different cultures. It's going to be awesome. You might even learn some new languages. If you like learning languages, it's brilliant. And obviously, you see another European city that you otherwise wouldn't have, and you get to actually live there. Travel opportunities are great. You can whiz off on the train to another city pretty easy rather than have to fly there from the UK and so on. I would say you're going to get generally smaller class sizes, and this will vary greatly. It will. I mean, in some schools, you might be looking at average class sizes of 10. In other schools, you might be looking at 25. But in an international environment, it's very rare you're going to get a class of over 30, especially in Europe and the Middle East and Asia. You're just not probably going to get a class size over 30. More often than not, it's going to be under 20. It's going to be under 20, particularly at Key Stage 4 and 5. It's going to be small class sizes. The weather is obviously a plus side to consider. I'm not going to talk about the weather too much because we know that where the weather can vary. If you go to Russia, it's freezing. If you go to Spain, where I am, I haven't had the heating on for 2.5 years, which tells you something about the weather. It never drops below 10, but in where I am in Galicia, the weather would rarely go over 30. So for me, that's perfect. For others, they might like something hotter. South America is always an option in that respect. But generally speaking, you're going to get better weather than in the UK. We mentioned cost of living. The average bottle of beer where I live in Vigo is €1.80. So that's about £1.50. The average meal out might be between €5 and €10 in the kind of average restaurant. City centre flat, you can get one for say €400 a month. So salaries are lower in the Mediterranean, but cost of living is also significantly lower. You're going to get fantastic students who want to learn. I've been absolutely blessed in the last 2 years to work with some absolutely amazing kids. Some of them are probably going to go on to be presidents of something, businesses, countries, you name it. Incredible characters, very down to earth, very friendly, very hardworking, brilliant attitude. Galicia is a real family orientated place. So It's quite unique in that way. It's in the middle. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's in the corner of Spain, the tip of Spain. It's kind of out there, and in some ways quite insular, but such a good community feel to the place. What are the downsides? What are the downsides of international teaching? I mentioned the salary. If you're looking for a big cash cow, you might want to spread your luck around and think very carefully. Cash cow, it's Middle East and Asia. Outside of that, you're going to struggle. You're going to lose your teacher pension. Even after the cuts to the TPS in the UK, it's still going to be a big chunk. You're not going to get a pension in some cases at all. You're not going to be paying in. So it's either you set up a private pension scheme through a bank in the UK, you invest in a property, you buy a property where you're going, but if you don't do any of those things, you're going to lose out on pension. Don't have a union, probably not going to have union access. So if you do go to a nightmare school, you can probably forget about union support. You're going to miss, if you're a home person, you're going to miss friends and family. If you like the home comforts, you might find it tough. Shops don't sell what you want. Prices vary. Can't see your friends and family. Might get lonely, especially if living on your own. You might find learning a language difficult. You might have less professional development opportunities. There are less professional development events. I know practical pedagogies, I'm going to that in a few weeks' time in Cologne. That's a real opportunity for me, but it's in Germany. If you think about somewhere like Spain, how many professional development opportunities are there for teachers in Spain? International ones, not many. Another one, and I've written about this before, is I've switched from working state to private, and there has been a few pangs of guilt for me over that. How much difference am I actually making? I'm not at all suggesting I'm not making any difference. If I wasn't making any difference, it would feel horrible. I do feel that I am, but all I'm saying is, compared to the areas I was working in before, with the students I was working with before, I don't probably think I'm making as much difference. But at the end of the day, what's more important to you? Well-being or how much difference you're making? That is a very difficult question to answer, but at the end of the day, for me, health has to come first, well-being has to come first above everything else, quality of life, happiness. And yes, I want to make a difference, and I am making a difference, but at the end of the day, there's other things that I think are an even bigger priority than that. Final thing to add as a footnote of uncertainty and doubt would be Brexit. What's going to happen? The Chequers deal, Theresa May was talking about minimum salaries for people coming from the EU to work in the UK. Someone mentioned something in the high 20s. Well, what's going to happen if an NQT wants to go and work in Italy on 24 starting salary? What if Italy then impose similar restrictions on UK citizens coming into the EU? What if they treat UK citizens like non-EU? Visas. Schools will have to pay for the visas. Will some schools survive? Will that double numbers that I mentioned earlier, the increase of international teachers from 400,000 to 800,000, will that peak or go down because of Brexit? We just don't know yet. And there is uncertainty. Where I'm working, there's uncertainty about this. It's coming up in March 2019, so it's quite soon. Big questions to be answered. And we don't know any of the answers yet. So a tumultuous time ahead, I would suggest. We're now going to listen to three very experienced international educators, Sam, James and Ali, who are all going to talk about their experiences in international teaching. Really around that question, is international teaching all it's cracked up to be?
Hi, my name is Sam. I've been a primary school teacher for the last 14 years, the first 10 of which was spent teaching in the UK, in a school in the south of England, but I'm now into my fourth year of teaching internationally in a large British school in Spain. It's difficult to reflect on whether teaching here is what I expected it to be, because I really didn't have strong preconceptions about what it would be like. I have had friends who have taught abroad, taught in places like Dubai and Qatar, and the general impression I had was that life as a teacher was easier, or at the very least less pressurised, but that was without ever really knowing what that meant in terms of your day-to-day life as a teacher. I certainly know why we made the move, and we made the move as a family. My wife is also a teacher, so we now teach at the same school, and my 2 daughters are students with us. And really, we moved because we'd both been in our schools in the UK for 10 years, and we just wanted a change. We wanted to experience something different. We wanted, I guess, a bit of an adventure. And above all, we wanted that kind of holy grail of thing for teachers, which is a better work-life balance. There were just too many times teaching in the UK where we felt that being a teacher meant that we couldn't be the parents that we wanted to be, and probably vice versa. So looking back 4 years on, and I can honestly say without any shadow of a doubt that it has been a hugely positive experience for us, for all of us. We are much happier. We do have a much more healthy work-life balance. And I just think that teaching now feels like kind of one part of our lives rather than the kind of all-encompassing nature of teaching in the UK. What I find tricky, though, is to say exactly what it is that makes the difference. Moving from a kind of ordinary state school in the UK to moving to an international school has actually meant that lots of things have changed, and I'm not sure which one has had the biggest impact. Simply by moving schools, we know makes a massive difference. The culture set by the head teacher and the systems and the staff and the leadership, we know makes a massive difference. But also moving abroad, moving to a different country, means that you're living within a different culture. Spain is a fantastically family-orientated country. The weather obviously plays a big part in that, but it's much more. Spain, like many countries, just has this culture and ethos where your job isn't allowed to take over your life like it can feel in the UK. There is just too much time spent on socialising and fiestas and food and drink, and when everybody is part of that ethos, it kind of rubs off on you. But also, moving to an international school, like most British schools abroad, means that we're now teaching in a private school with the fantastic facilities and the small class sizes that comes with. So it's difficult to know exactly what has made the biggest difference of those, probably a combination of all of them. But what I don't think that means is that life is easier as a teacher here. There are still pressures. Teaching is always a pressurized job. There is still that daily, never-ending cycle of planning, teaching, marking. We still have reports. We still have inspections. We still have parent meetings. We still have productions to put on. And of course, moving country puts the added pressure that you are away from family. You can experience feeling a bit isolated. Living abroad also means that there's often a language barrier that needs to be dealt with. So I really don't think that teaching internationally is any easier than teaching in the UK, but I really do think it's healthier. And the thing that I think that really comes down to is time. Time was the thing I never felt I had enough of in the UK. Never enough time with the kids or out of the classroom to do all the things I needed to do. And I certainly never felt like I had enough time with my family. But the way that the working day and terms are organised here is different. We actually work, certainly in my school, a much longer day, over an hour a day longer. But non-contact time makes up a higher percentage of the week. Regular sessions outside of the classroom means that it's much easier to keep on track of and on top of all those tasks that need doing, I now very rarely bring work home at the weekends or in the evenings. And the real payoff of that extra time is in the holidays. We don't have half terms in the way that we do in the UK, but with 3 full weeks off at Christmas and then up to 11 weeks off in the summer is such an important part of the year, a time when you are totally away from school, a big chunk of time to travel, to visit friends, to switch off completely. And I think that also means that when you come back, you are refreshed and actually excited about coming back to school, seeing everybody again, and starting a new academic year. So to summarise, I really don't think that anybody should be looking to move to an international school because they want an easy life. Teaching is never an easy option. And I certainly think it's true that if you are thinking about moving abroad, then you must do your research, because just like the UK, there are massive differences in the quality and supportiveness of schools around the world. We've been incredibly fortunate to end up at a school with a fantastically supportive group of staff and amazing children. And honestly, at this point in our lives and with things as they are in the UK, I don't know what would bring us back.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, in terms of whether international teaching was what I expected it to be, I guess for me, yeah, it was. I had a friend who had worked in New Zealand. Another had gone off to Japan, and the feedback that they'd provided was really positive, and kind of a lot of it focused on work-life balance and just being able to teach as well. And they'd come from similar schools that I'd worked in, and that was the core thing that came back really, is that you just have that opportunity to teach without any hassle. So when I first got to my first international school in Mexico, that's definitely something I found totally surpassed my expectations really. I think the work-life balance was a complete shift. I was finishing at 2:30 initially in the first few years I was there. Could walk out the door at 2:30, could be in a gym by 3 o'clock. And the evenings were pretty much, free a lot of the time, because in school you could work smart and get a lot of what you needed to do done. Smaller class sizes meant that you could complete half a set of books in an actual lesson. So there were really many positives to that. I definitely think it's better, in terms of is it better than the UK? I think it depends on your own context really, and maybe what your relationships were like with the school that you were in, with the students that you worked with the teachers that you were working with as well. I just found in Mexico the students were incredible. They were well motivated, but really confident young people that were just so open-minded, and I think that was just a consequence of being in an international school, which is so diverse, and the curriculum at primary level just really encouraged them to think independently. And I felt that when they made that transition to secondary, you could really see that. They were students that wanted to take risks and didn't need that kind of constant support to know how to get started with tasks, and that was really kind of enriching to work with. The big positives for me is, you are working with talented and hard-working students for the most part, and that does stretch you as a teacher. There is pressure there. The pressure is delivering high-quality results to get students to elite universities or colleges. But as a history teacher, for me, that meant that you really had to work hard to improve your subject knowledge, and you had the time to do that because class sizes, as I said, were smaller, and you also had some additional free time in terms of free periods. So that's one of the things I enjoyed, and moving to Poland and living and working there and teaching like Cold War history and living behind the Iron Curtain in many ways. It's just, that is just the opportunity to live and breathe your subject and actually speak to teachers at the school who actually lived under communist rule, and aspects like that, just shows that when you travel as a history teacher, it just broadens your experience of history phenomenally. In terms of the challenges, you're living in a different country, so that's the obvious. The language can be hard. If you're showing an active interest in learning the language, like I did with Spanish in Mexico, it can be immensely rewarding, and you can engage with the general people as well. But that was much harder in Poland. The language was just really, really difficult, and we were deterred pretty much from the outset by people saying that to us. So it can be quite isolating, if you don't have the language skills. Expats can be a bit cliquey as well at times, and that can be an issue.
I would say that after teaching for comprehensives in the UK for 11 years, my husband and I, life was okay, it was fine, the schools were all right. We thought we would just be able to do the same job in a more exciting location. So teaching internationally wasn't something that we felt we were pushed into because life was so horrendous. But having said that, it was something that we knew would give us opportunities that we wouldn't have had if we'd stayed in Britain. And it has utterly changed our life. And it's given us as parents opportunities for our son that he would never have had in Britain. And so I would say fundamentally, teaching overseas is better than teaching in Britain. Yes, it is. I mean, you are paid to do a job, and you need to do that job, and you are on a contract that can be ended quickly, and principals are looking for workers who enjoy travelling and seeing the world, but they don't want travellers who are working in their school just to fund the next holiday. You are still doing the same job, you're still planning lessons, you're still on a pretty hefty timetable probably, you're still marking, you've still got piles of books and assessments, you've got reports, you've got parents who expect their children to be doing well. But I would say 99% of people that I've worked with overseas in the last 7 years wouldn't go back to Britain to teach. And for a lot of us, it's not necessarily because life and teaching in Britain is so horrendous that they're being pushed away, but it's because you can get a better life abroad. The balance is better. I'm currently teaching in the Middle East, and anybody who knows anything about international teaching will immediately think the pay. And yes, teaching in the Middle East is pretty lucrative. You have a tax-free salary, you've probably got free accommodation, you've probably not got any utilities bills, you'll have flights home, and so you get well remunerated for what you do. And the Middle East is, you've got a very high standard of living. You're treated with fairly high amounts of respect. It's relatively westernized. There's not much here that I can't get hold of. You can live without a drink, and you can live without a bacon sandwich for a couple of weeks on end. You're fine. It's a travel hub. You can get to anywhere you want, really, if you save up your money. It's about a 6 or 7 hour flight to Heathrow, which isn't so bad. And it sounds silly, but the weather, the sunshine helps. I remember, years of that rainy Tuesday in February where it's dark by 4 o'clock and you've got the horizontal rain coming at you. The sunshine, it does help. I mean, living in the Middle East isn't perfect. you've got some pretty steep barriers to climb, especially if you're teaching a humanities subject. You'll have a fair number of your students who don't value humanities because in their heads they're going to be an engineer, they're going to be a doctor, they're going to be an architect, and so to them, history, my subject, doesn't matter. That's quite hard to overcome at times. You've got obviously the social issues, gender expectations of dress and so on. Living here during Ramadan can be quite limiting. You can't eat or drink in public, and you'd be amazed at the number of times you want to have a swig of water in daylight hours in front of somebody else. You can't do that. You'll find that children being sent to international schools will be possibly slightly more liberal, they're possibly a little bit more travelled, and the parents as well. But at the same time, you've still got sensitivities over honour and slighting somebody's honour. So, you've got to be very careful with any banter with students, any jokes that you crack. You've got to be extremely sensitive to their point of view of the world. There are things that I can and cannot say in the classroom, especially in history. I know the science department have fun trying to get around evolution and teaching that at times. And you've also got, and in some ways I think it's quite a good thing, in that it makes you challenge what you expect students to know as just sort of their cultural background. I taught in Thailand before we came to the Middle East, and when you started mentioning maybe something about the Reformation, you had to tell them literally, what a church was, because most of the students had never seen one. And, Christianity, they had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. And so you can't just take these things for granted, but it's quite bracing in some ways to have to completely reevaluate what you expect somebody to know and to value or to understand. I'd say another specific challenge is the bureaucracy, the pace of work, pace of office work. It's not terribly obvious, but there's a bit of a culture of having to grease the wheels, a bit of backsheesh to just get things done. So it's overall, I very much like living in the Middle East. It's very positive, and the students are 99.9% absolutely lovely. You sometimes rage against sort of apathy and entitled children not doing any work, but then at the same time, where we are in the Middle East, they are literally entitled to a living. The government gives them huge amounts of money to stay there, and quite a lot of them are never actually going to have to work for a living. So you're not necessarily fighting terrible behaviour, but you're certainly trying to instill a work ethic that quite a few of them don't have and won't ever need to have. I'd say overall the best things about teaching overseas is the work-life balance. It's the opportunity to travel. Our son is 10 and he's on his 3rd passport with just all the places we've been able to go, short hops here and there. You are treated with greater respect. You are treated with perhaps a little bit more status. The parents have deliberately chosen to pay a decent amount of money for their children to be educated by you, and so they value you in a way that perhaps you might not get in Britain. The students are that little bit more sheltered. As a parent, it's lovely to see that children can be children. There's not a culture of quite young sexualisation that I saw happening in Britain. There's no culture of drinking either in Thailand or here in the Middle East. They are that little bit more innocent. They are that little bit more childlike, and that's very good to see. 99% of them are thoroughly lovely. Teaching overseas, you have much bigger gap between pay and cost of living. You can save a lot more. You have far more disposable income. We're saving for our son's university already and have been since he was 4. So you feel perhaps more financially secure. The interesting parts in the classroom of teaching children whose first language isn't English is very good. I'm much better at that now. I'm much better at helping them with the quality of their written English, their grammar, their punctuation, their spelling, their vocabulary. Also, not having the national curriculum, you consider far more and far more deeply, why am I teaching them these things? What on earth does a classroom of 14, 15 nationalities need to know? And so you think about your craft in the classroom in far more detail, because back in Britain we decided what we were teaching based on the national curriculum, and quite frankly based on the books that we had, because we knew that we weren't going to be able to buy any more in the budget. So trying to meet different needs of different nationalities and different language levels, you're far more focused on skills and the quality of the content that you teach. And you're much more international in your outlook in terms of how you feel you engage in the world. My son has only lived in Britain for the first 4 years of his life. So if he doesn't want to go to university in Britain, he doesn't have to. Partly that would be helpful because then he wouldn't have to pay the international fees. But you get far more of a sense of it's a global thing rather than it's, in our catchment area. It's not perfect. Teaching overseas does come with risks. There's no unions. Your contract can, and I've seen them, will be ended very quickly if you're not pulling your weight. You'll probably be on a 1 or 2 year contract, and the school doesn't have to offer you a renewal. You will probably have to resign without another job to go to. You will probably be asked somewhere around about November, December if you wish to stay. And some schools will not give you a reference if you haven't already resigned. Things like work visas, paperwork, they're pretty significant costs in terms of getting your documents legalised, getting them notarised, getting them authorised by various different people. Medicals, these are not cheap things. The ability to get decent healthcare. School may provide you with health insurance, you might not. Bupa is not cheap, it's pretty expensive. You may be using local healthcare, which might be slightly ropey. That would be something definitely to look at. Working in a for-profit school is also a big shift, in that the school is literally a business. Quite often the entrance exam for the students will be their ability to pay the fees. So, when you know that everything's having 15-20% added onto it so that the shareholders get their bit, that can go against your principles at times. Also, on 1 and 2 year contracts, the staff room can have a revolving door of new faces and people. You get pretty transient friendships. You'll find yourself socialising with colleagues in a way that you might not do in Britain. You may well find yourself being housed with colleagues, which you may not wish to or you may not enjoy. You'll find yourself missing family events. You'll find yourself missing, friends back at home. People may not be able to come to see you because of the distance or the cost of getting to come to see you. So you are cut off in some ways. Newer, younger staff, if they're pretty early on in their career, may well find themselves, if they come out to teach abroad, that they don't get a particularly realistic view of teaching. And I think that would be very hard if you went back to Britain. If you'd come out and, you got used to a much higher standard of living than I certainly did in my first few years as a teacher. I think that would be very difficult if you went back. But having said that, the first principal I ever worked for overseas, he'd left Britain in the 70s after about 2 years and never returned. His family have now ended up, I think they're in Australia. Things like some of the schools are properly cowboy schools. You need to do your homework. You need to see who it's accredited by. CIS, the Council of International Schools, they'll have a pretty decent standard mark. British schools in the Middle East, or Federation of British International Schools in Asia, there will be a big quality mark. Somebody like COBIS, Council of British International Schools, there'll be a decent quality mark. You need to do your homework on exactly who owns the school, who it's accredited by, and so on. When was it last inspected? Who was it inspected by? You'll find that in the country that you go to, you may well find very different attitudes to child protection, to SEN. You may well come up against some pretty difficult times in which there are no social services, or sort of different cultural expectations on how you can treat your child. So you may well find that you're sending a child home to a situation that you wouldn't do in Britain, and that's pretty tough. But I would say fundamentally what you need to do if you're thinking about coming to live and work overseas is you need to decide what's important to you. What do you want from it? Are you in it just for the cash? Are you in it for travelling? Are you in it as a long-term career? Are you in it because you can't stand living in Britain anymore and teaching in Britain? You need to decide what you value, and you need to find a part of the world that matches that. And then you need to make sure that when you return to Britain, you're returning to something that's going to be acceptable, that's going to work for you. Things like saving for a pension. The school may offer you financial advisors, but you won't get any pension payments out of the school, unlikely. So you'd want to be thinking about that. You'd want to be thinking about paying your national insurance contributions from overseas. You'd want to be thinking about savings, either for a house or just in the long term. You need to decide what you're doing this for. Is it just a 2-year, 3-year overseas break, or are you in this for the long haul? Fundamentally, it's great. I love it. I wouldn't go back to Britain, and I think it's given our son a better life abroad. No job is perfect. Nowhere is perfect. You just need to do your homework and consider the pros and cons, and then just apply. Apply and enjoy it. Apply and just do it. Just take the leap. The hardest thing is buying the flight ticket, really. I would say overall, it's a great choice.
Thanks to all our contributors. That was amazing, and so many different perspectives and angles and so many things to consider. This podcast has been brought to you by me, Tom Rogers. This is the Rebel Education Podcast. If you want to get involved, then please tweet me at Rogers History. Subscribe to the Rebel Education Podcast on Podbean or iTunes. I hope to see you next week for more. I've really enjoyed this podcast, and thanks again to all the amazing guests who have contributed. See you all next week. Bye.